would like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. Can I get a roll call? We have Trustee Patty Chow Malave here. Okay, and myself, Trustee Shelby, of Director Tom Hood, and Director Tim Hicks, I'm sorry. Okay, can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, can we have a moment of silence, reflection? Okay, thank you. Now I would like to turn the meeting over to the Finance Director, Tom Hood.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for showing up. We are going to record this tonight and have it posted on the website, along with the PowerPoint presentation that we were planning on showing to you, but we're having a little technical difficulties with our screen, so we won't be able to do that. As a little background, we went through a period of time here where there's been lots of obstacles, including not having enough staff, COVID, delays related to COVID, trying to catch up. But finally, we have the fiscal 21 audit finished and complete, and we've got a schedule in place now. We're going to start the 22, not next month, but in November, and hopefully get that done and be able to do 23 right after that, so that by next summer we'll be back on our regular schedule. And we're now knock on wood that it all goes fine. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Coyle here to, for those that you don't know, he's a partner with Baker Tilly, and he's going to go over the financial results and give us some suggestions.
Okay. Do you want me at the podium or right here? Okay. I think that's on. All right, well, good evening. Thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and thanks for pulling together the slides, which I think we have in paper form here and will eventually be, as you said, on the website in PDF form. So you pulled the slides directly from the audited financial information, so I will go through the slides just because they're for easy reference. As Tom mentioned, this is the audit for fiscal year 21 that we're going over right now. So, obviously that's a few years in arrears right now, so just keep that in mind as we go over the financial information, that a lot of things could have transpired subsequent to, when this information was finalized and these numbers were compiled as of 4/30/21. So the first page in your handout or in the PDF of the slides talks about the audit opinion. Tom pulled this together, and he's exactly right. You do have what is known as an unqualified or unmodified audit opinion. It is the highest level of assurance we could give over the financial information within your financial statements. And basically what that means is somebody could pick up either physically or virtually the financial statements of the village and rely on the financial information that's within there in all material respects as they evaluate your financial health and the financial operations of the village. And that's what the purpose of the audit is. Obviously, everything in your financial statements is your information, except for the 3 pages of the opinion from my firm at the beginning. I will point out that we don't audit the police or the fire pension funds. Those are audited by other auditors, and we mentioned that in our opinion. The information is incorporated within your financial statements nonetheless, so that you have a complete package of all of the financial information, but the information related to the police and fire pension funds we obtain from different auditors. Not in your handout, but in the financial statements, there's a section called the management's discussion and analysis. And I only will point that out to recommend that anybody on a governing body at least read the management's discussion analysis, or MD&A. I think it does a great job of summarizing what went on during the year. It compares it to last year. There's some pie charts in there showing where your money comes from and where your money goes. And it just does a great job of kind of summarizing what went on during the year, if you don't want to look at, the 150 pages worth of financial information in the remainder of the report. Before I get to the governmental funds, which is on the second page or the third page of the slide here, I do want to talk about the statement of net position within the financial statements. This is something that you only see once a year, and it's where we take all of the funds of the village and we collapse them down into a column, and we put information on there you don't typically see. So we incorporate your capital assets, so your roads, your buildings, your police cars, your fire trucks, things like that. We include those, the value of those on there, and also on that statement are your long-term liabilities. So the amount of any debt you have outstanding in the form of bonds, for example. And also in Illinois, one of the hot topics is pension fund liabilities. That's a long-term liability that is placed onto that statement of net position. There's also a lot of information related to the pensions in your notes. I point that out to say that you have three pension funds: the police pension fund, the firefighters pension fund, and the IMRF. The IMRF is actually what we call in a net pension asset position, which means IMRF holds more money on your behalf than they've calculated your long-term liabilities to be. So that's a great thing. That means the calculated contributions to IMRF are going to be very low comparatively because you don't need to build up a larger balance there. Your police and fire pension funds do have what we call net pension liabilities, which is where you take the calculated long-term liability that the actuary does, reduce that by the amount of investments you have in both of those funds, and that gives you what we call the net pension liability. One of the police pension net pension liability is $16 million approximately, and the fire pension is $21.3 million. That's not to say that you're not contributing to those pension funds on a regular basis, and I'll talk about those later on. So looking at page 3, though of the handout, the governmental funds. So your general fund there, which is kind of the column in the middle, that's your corporate fund. We call it the general fund for external financial reporting purposes, but internally that's usually called the corporate fund. That's your primary operating fund. And as you can see, that fund near the bottom of the page increased fund balance by $780,799 for the year, which increased your fund balance to $3.1 million during the year. So, the one thing I always like to point out when I talk about the corporate fund or the general fund, your primary operating fund, is I'd like to do a ratio of what's your fund balance to your expenditures for the year and see what that ratio is. Right now, you're about 20%, which means you could go 20% of the year without collecting any revenues in that fund and still be able to pay your bills. There's no right or wrong number, a ratio number that should be. 20% is just a fact of what it is. It is on, I would argue, on the lower side of where I see a lot of municipalities at. So obviously the more money you have in reserves, the more you can weather catastrophes in the village if you needed to, or delays in property tax revenue from Cook County, for example, and things like that. But 20% is just a guideline as to where you are now, and something you could track over time to see if that number goes up or down over time. Overall, you could see with all your governmental funds on the right-hand side of this page near the bottom, increased fund balance by $1.3 million during the year, bringing your total fund balance of your governmental funds up to $10.4 million. I'll actually skip the next slide, which is your balance sheet, and go to slide 5, which is the statement of revenues and expenses and changes in net position for your proprietary fund. Your proprietary fund is your water and sewer fund. The primary classification of a proprietary fund is that it's generating revenue from charges for services. So unlike your governmental funds that are largely supporting themselves based on property taxes, sales taxes, and other kind of taxes, the proprietary funds are meant to be self-sustaining based upon the charges for services, in this case, charges for water and for sewer services. And it did that during fiscal year 21. You see an operating income there in the middle of the page of $76,528, which meant during the year the charges for services exceeded the overall operating expenses of the fund, and overall had an increase in net position of $156,179 during the year. So that increased your net position slightly, and at least at the time, the proprietary funds were charging an appropriate amount to meet the current operating expenditures. And I'll skip the next slide as well, actually the next 2 slides, and I'll go to the fiduciary funds. which is slide 8. Your fiduciary funds are primarily the pension funds that I was mentioning previously, your police pension fund and your firefighter pension fund. That information is incorporated here under the pension trust column. They're both collapsed down here together. You can see for fiscal year 21, the village contributed a little over $3 million in employee contributions to the pension funds, and that generally is in line with what the required contributions are that are calculated by the actuary every year. You saw very good investment returns. Your net investment income was $12.8 million during the year, which is kind of in the middle of that page there. Obviously, the market has continued to fluctuate since the end of fiscal year 21, but for this moment in time, you had really good investment rate returns of the $12.8 million. So obviously, with such good investment returns, your additions to the pension trust funds exceeded your disbursements. Your disbursements from those funds are largely payments to retirees and other beneficiaries. So you increased your net position in the police and firefighter pension fund collectively by $10.7 million during the year. And obviously, the more that you earn in interest earnings, the larger the funding percentages of those funds, and over time, that means the less in employer contributions you would need to make to those funds. So, that's why we always like to see good investment earnings in the pension trust funds. And that's really the heart of those statements I just went over are really the heart of your financial statements. In the audited financial statements, there's a lot more information. There's notes to the financial statements, which show a lot of information of your long-term debt, a lot of information related to pension funds that we talked about, and then after the notes, which you don't necessarily have in front of you, if you don't have the full audit report in front of you, is budgetary information. So all of the funds of the village, it shows the budget, your actual, and you can see how you did in each one of those funds compared to how the budget was laid out as of the beginning of the year. So there's a lot of valuable information within the financial statements if you wanted to get into that kind of depth. And I'll just talk quickly about another document that we put together, which is kind of our recommendations for improvement. Keep in mind that, again, this was related to operations that were in place during fiscal year 21, so several years ago. Things probably have changed subsequent to that. So we did have some recommendations for improvement, and I won't go through them in depth because it's largely, they're carry forwards from the previous year of other recommendations. The biggest thing that, we as the auditors want to see is the bank recs to be done in a more timely manner, and I know that's what Tom is focusing his energy on over the next couple months in order to get things in order for us to be able to come back in November to work on the 22 financial statements. That is a critical component of your internal control process, is to make sure the bank recs are done as timely as possible. Ideally, we'd like to see the bank reconciliations be done, 1 month after the current month. So, June bank reconciliations would be done in July after June is closed. And so that, the timeliness is twofold. Obviously, it makes sure nothing inappropriate went through your bank, some sort of fraud perpetrated by a third party. But it also just makes sure that all the information you're seeing it captures all the appropriate information, that anything that might have hit your bank account in the form of revenues was appropriately coded to the financial statements during that month, so that thus the board reports you're getting have the most accurate and timely information on a regular basis. So that's really where I would recommend you focus all your attention, is at getting those bank reconciliations up to date, and then you can start focusing on any other operational improvements that you might want to improve some controls. So I know that was a lot. I know it was also quick, but that's kind of the highlights of the 21 audit. And happy to take any questions or delve further into anything if you have any further comments or further questions.
I would welcome Trustee Abraham. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Anybody have questions in the audience?
Okay,
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
thank you.
I don't have a question, but Jason, can you tell us what our position is as a village since this audit is now completed?
Position as in what?
Financially, like, what was the bottom line number for the completed audit?
Well, your governmental funds increased their fund balances overall by $1.3 million. So, overall, and as did the proprietary funds. So overall, your financial position improved from the beginning of the year in fiscal year 21 to the end of the year in fiscal year 21. As I mentioned, it's 21, so it's a few years in arrears. Things could have changed subsequent to then, and I'm sure they have. But that's where it stood as of the end of 21, though. So, yep.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other
I
questions?
had several questions, but it's for 2021, so these, it might have already been addressed, right? And then 2022, compare the two?
I don't know any comparison to 2022 because I haven't compared anything,
When
but
we do it in November?
that's the plan right now, is to commence the 2022 audit in November. Obviously, it takes time to get through that, and then we'll have to do the compilation of the financial statements and things like that. But that's our hope, is to start in 22 to kind of get things back on track.
So then we'll be reviewing something more current, because this is probably already corrected, right? So November it starts, and then what's the general timeframe?
It would be early in 24 that we would be wrapping something up and coming back to the board. That's assuming that everything's in order when we come in, and the bank recs, Tom's able to get through the bank recs, which is a big process, and that, all the other financial information we need is pulled together, but, yeah.
So far, like 2021, we're in the good, everything was good for that.
But we need certain controls in place.
Yeah.
That may be there already.
That's exactly
May.
right. Yeah, I mean, we looked at the controls that were in place during 21. When we come back to do 22, we'll attempt to evaluate what the controls were in 22. And then, when we do 23, we'll evaluate the controls in 23. With Tom starting really at the beginning of fiscal year 24, that's when maybe additional changes started to take place, just because his position. So it really won't be till your fiscal year 24 audit, which will, is going to be in several years from now, that, we'll probably start to see some more significant improvements or changes to your control structure. I would assume that the recommendations that we gave as far as the controls here, you'll probably see those for the next couple of years, just because not much has changed over that course of time. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything? Any
So
other
I got a comment so Jason, we know we complete in fiscal year 2021, so we can't project what fiscal year 22 or 23 is until we do it.
Yeah,
So we
right.
don't even need to think about like a decision that needs to be made, but can you give us a comparable from 20 financial audit to compare the two? Because that's what we can actually compare 21 to, is to 20.
I don't have that pulled together, as far as where your revenues and expenditures and how that, I didn't pull all that together for this, other than, as I mentioned, your fund balances did increase during the year, from what your fund balances were at the conclusion of fiscal year 20. I mean, that's something that, I could work with Tom to pull together something and that we could easily share with you, but I don't have that crafted right now.
I think that would help the trustees understand the financial audit and where we are at this point.
Sure.
And then when we look at 22, we can compare 22 to 21.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do. The financial statements are in the same format in 21 as they are in 20, so we could easily kind of line those up and put some comparisons together.
The 2023 audit in 2024, it should be really good.
Yeah, we don't know, really.
But, no, it's, that's a true comparison, right, like present time
Right, yeah.
would be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ideally, you're getting your audits done approximately 6 months after the end of your fiscal year. It's still a long time. It's still it's half a year after the conclusion of your fiscal year, but that's kind of the general timeline that, 6 to 9 months even, by the time you come and report out to the board and stuff like that.
But I will add this, because we do have some new trustees, since this administration have been in office since 2017, we've had favorable audits.
Keeps getting back.
That's good.
And I just wanted to point out also, even though we don't have it broken down by fund on the entity-wide financial analysis on page 7, it kind of compares 22 to 21. And you can see in each one of those, like overall, the negative 11.9 fell to 10.6, which is a 1.3 improvement of this year. So that page there kind of shows you for the assets and liabilities, what those changes are, but I think what you're asking is, could we see it at a fund level?
Yeah, yeah. The fund level probably would be easier for them to relate
Right.
to than the entity-wide statements, yes. And Tom, you and I could help you pull that together, and, you know, it
Sure,
would be,
sure,
yeah.
yeah.
Not to say that you probably couldn't do that
And I
yourself,
also
but,
wanted to point out that when people look at this, they see that big negative number. But as you pointed out in your presentation, the fire pension,
Oh,
you
yeah.
had the numbers off the top of your head. What were was it 14?
yeah, right, yeah, if you're looking at this, Tom, the statement of net position, it does show a negative net position, which is a deficit, right? But, you know, to your point, that is largely related to your net pension liabilities, yeah. Yeah, the police and fire net pension liabilities collectively are $37 million.
So if you would add that 37 to the minus 20.3, I didn't think it'd be that big a difference. I thought-
Yeah, well, also in there is, and I didn't mention it, is your other post-employment benefits liability.
Right.
You know, which is another,
yeah.
that's almost $7 million, so.
So mainly that net position overall is related to our pensions and our obligations
Right.
to our past employees, that it wasn't taken care of 15, 20 years ago, and now we're trying to find ways to take care of it today.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, every community has, I shouldn't say every, most communities do have a net pension liability, just because you're continuing to fund it. You're making contributions. Some funds are better funded than others. I think you're at like 50 or 60%, depending upon which fund we're talking about, at least as of fiscal year 21. And those have been increasing slightly. Those percentages have been increasing slightly, the funded percentages. But yeah, it's a long-term liability that you'll continue to fund for many, many years.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Any
What is an
questions?
interfund?
An interfund, that's where, so you, as we talked about, you have multiple funds. You have water fund, you have your corporate fund, you have your TIF funds, things like that. So that's when they either loan money to each other or they make transfers to each other. So when it's a transfer, we don't call it a revenue. We call it a transfer because otherwise you're kind of like making your own revenues.
Yeah.
So we do that, call it a transfer, is kind of below the line. So. Each fund is kind of like its own business, is probably the best way to think of it. So you kind of like have a lot of little businesses that you have in your financial statements.
Is there any follow-up required or needed?
For the audit? No,
Not-
no, not necessarily.
No closeout?
Just this kind of closes out the year. Everything's been submitted to the comptroller's office, so they're happy. The biggest thing is just moving forward to 22 and trying to get you back on track.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay. Thank you so much
All right,
for
thank
your
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would like to, if everything is settled, I'd like to join the meeting, and I would recommend the Board of Trustees approval on this at our next board meeting. Okay?
Yes,
That's fine.
yes.
I have a
I would
motion.
recommend it. You want a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Or a motion to pass it on to the board meeting?
Okay, I second.
So,
Okay,
do
thank
it.
you, everyone, for coming and your participation. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.